And assumptions, a lot of times, they're not terrible things. Assumptions can be beneficial to us. But they aren't definitive, for sure. For sure. So, for example, what Epictetus is getting at here. Every harsh appearance. What's something that goes wrong in life? Yeah.
Breaking a bone.
Okay, exactly. You're breaking a bone. One of my 10th graders came in actually during nutrition, and he was in an arm sling. And I looked at him, and so of course I like him. So what do I start doing? Making fun of him because he has a broken arm. He comes in and he says, and so I started making a bunch of jokes about how he has to write his assignments out because it's his writing arm that's all busted up and everything like that. So if I like him, so I make fun of him. I give him a hard time because I like him. If I don't like you, I won't even bother talking to you. But him, he's fun, so I give him a bunch of shit over it. Now, is it bad that he broke his arm? I don't know. Because to us, it looks like a bad thing, at least for what Epictetus is saying. But there are things that happen in your life that they seem terrible, but they're actually not so bad. You might, again, at the time, what we mean to say is, I don't like this. Not that it's bad, but just simply, I don't like this. I can give some examples. Okay, one example I can think of off the top of my head. I was talking with second period about this today. I died one time. It's the first time I ever died. You know what I mean by this? Oh, okay, good. When I was 21, I was having some trouble speaking. I kept slurring, I kept stuttering. I felt kind of off, so I went to the doctor to get checked out. And they did a series of tests on me. I went in for my follow-up where they went over the results, and then the doctor came in and he had a nurse with him. And the nurse was carrying this really pretty pamphlet with her, And the doctor, in short, said to me, listen, he says, John, I say, hi. He said, how are you, John? My first name is John. I don't go by John. My full name is John Stephen Joseph Slane Scanlon. But I go by Stephen because my dad's name is John, my brother's name is John, my sister's name is Jonna. So they lacked imagination, my parents, in first names. So I've never gone by John before. But still, it's on my ID, it's on my credit cards, it's all John. So sometimes I get called that, and rather than, I'm not that person who sits there and is like, oh, it's Stephen. Even my name is spelled S-T-E-P-H-E-N, it's the Irish spelling. And people want to argue with me like, Stephen? I don't argue with them, I just say, yeah, whatever, man. And go get my coffee, whatever. But I go in, the doctor says, John, there's no easy way of saying this. In short, he goes on to tell me that I had a brain tumor, and he gave me 6 months to live, completely inoperable, 6 months to live. So there I was, 21 years old, thinking, holy shit, 6 months to live. And he says, I understand that this is very difficult, and so the nurse hands me his pamphlet. That's what she was holding in her hands. And she looked very concerned. She was very reassuring, but also concerned at the same time. So I took the pamphlet. That pamphlet was titled "Coping with Death." So I'm not making up a single syllable of any of this. And I look at this. I look at it, and I'm just like, okay. And the doctor goes on to explain. Inside there are some resources. There are support groups, people who are in a similar situation as you. And I said, oh, like the situation of dying? And he says, yes. And so I feel like everyone should be in that support group, because everyone's going to die. And he kind of says, that's one way of seeing it. Not even now you can have a sense of humor. So, on the back, like a bunch of support groups. And I remember one of the pictures in there was of a really pretty sunset, which I guess was really telling, right? Because it wasn't a sunrise because you weren't being born. It was a sunset because you're dying. And so I remember leaving his office, and he said, we'll call you, we'll do some follow-ups, more results, more tests, we'll get a better handle on how things are going. But essentially he said that treatment would be impossible because of where it was located, and it was a done deal. So I walked out on the sidewalk, and I remember standing there holding this really pretty pamphlet. And all these cars are going by, and the people are walking by on the sidewalk, and it's just like life is going on, like absolutely nothing has happened. And it occurred to me that nothing had happened to anybody else in the world except for me at this moment. And all these people going by, no one cared. No one gave a shit. No one, stopped to see if anything was okay. No one saw the look on my face because everyone was so wrapped up in their own world. The only people who seemed to even notice that I was even still alive were some of the people walking on the sidewalk because they had to go around me. And I remember a couple of them had this look on their face like they were irritated that that I was still alive. Irritated that I was still standing on the sidewalk. And so it all of a sudden struck me, like a whole wave hit me at that point where it seemed like a strange thing suddenly that so many of us live to try to get the acceptance of all of these people who are driving by and walking by, none of whom really care if you live or die. They only care if you're in their way. And yet so many of us will live in a way that we're trying to be accepted by them. We're trying to get their big thumbs up. And so I went home, and you know those 12 stages of grief they have? You know, they say like, grief and bargaining, anger, denial, anger, bargaining, as you go through. The last one is supposed to be acceptance. I think I went through all 12 of those steps like in 2 hours. It was a big emotional roller coaster for me. And at the end of it, I just thought, well, I've got 6 months. And so I thought, how is it that I'm going to live with only 6 months? Because there's lots of ways that people can live. Of course, you can be angry and bitter, or you can try to make the most of it. And so it really focused me, and probably because of my background in philosophy, it really focused me to now start to search for what's the best way to live this life. And even since then, it's still one of those things that like how best to spend your time, how best to live life. It inevitably still kind of buggers me as this question, because it strikes me as a thing that's just unspeakably sad in a life that's, even if you're going to live 100 years, it's still unspeakably short. If you're going to live 6 months, what's the difference between 6 months and 100 years when you're talking about eternity? It doesn't almost seem to matter at all how long it's going to be. And so I started thinking about the ways that I thought would be best to live. And one of the things I realized was I shouldn't be spending my time, I should be investing it, which we talked a little bit about before. That's where I could have developed the idea. And so I decided I don't like paying bills. It's a pain. So I stopped paying bills. However, I realized I had an obligation to pay the money that I owed for bills. So I just set everything up on autopay. And all of my bills have been on autopay ever since then. I haven't written any checks or paid any bills all the way since then. Everything's on autopay. And so I never see it. And by the way, I've never sat there at the end of the month and been like, man, I feel like I really want to sit here and do bills. That's never occurred to me. So I started thinking about the people in my life who seem to take more away from life than adding to it. And so I thought, well, maybe put your time into the people who are going to be adding to your life rather than taking away from it. And so I started coming up with a mental list of the people who I wanted to invest time with, and then people who I wanted to never talk to again. And then all of a sudden life kind of came into this focus where it wasn't a matter of like, I'm going to die in 6 months, so let me go skydiving. I'm going to die in 6 months, let me go, see Australia. It wasn't anything like that, because you realize that if tomorrow doesn't come, then today didn't matter anyway. So the whole focus and the whole, beauty of life wasn't found in going and doing crazy things. It was more in just kind of like the everyday life, the thing that, because most of us will, we live for the weekends or we live for a vacation. When you've got 50 years ahead of you, well, yeah, it makes sense to live this way. But when you've only got 6 months to live it, it brought into this very narrow focus where it was, I guess I better find something enjoyable every day, even in the routine things, even just in walking down to the liquor store, or even just in talking to my neighbor or whatever. And so I continued to live that way. I developed a deep peace about a lot of things. And it wasn't like an acceptance of like walking around like a monk, It was just, I found the absurdity in life, so everything, I already had a sense of humor, but everything became 100 times funnier to me. Like when you hear people argue about like stupid shit, like in a video later on we're going to see who's going to do the dishes. Who's going to argue about who's going to do the dishes? You have 6 months to live. How much time do you want to spend arguing with people? You want to argue over a parking spot with somebody? You're going to let yourself get pissed off because somebody cuts you off in traffic? Because every minute you stay angry is a minute that you're going to lose of your overall life. And so all of these things that take on great importance for certain people suddenly no longer mattered to me. And I wonder if any of you guys know someone who's terminal, if you'd find the same kinds of responses from them that they've gone through. And so, as the doctor said, he called me because they wanted to do some follow-ups, but I decided I didn't want to spend time in a doctor's office. That's just a downer. I certainly didn't call any of the numbers in the back of the pamphlet because I figured if you go talk to people who are going to support, like, we're all supporting each other in dying, and I just kept thinking, like, I imagine everybody who's in that group has to be new, right? Because the people who were in the group are dead, so you always have to replace them with new people who are, so nobody in there is going to be an expert in it, because no one's been dying for 100 years, you know? And then I figured, so everybody's either going to be really like, very calm, and which is going to annoy the shit. I'm going to punch someone and spend the last 6 months of my life in prison, or they're going to be very dark and dour and sad, and I don't want to spend time with those folks either, so I just went ahead and lived my life. I didn't tell anybody that it was even happening. I just kind of tried to be. And so I don't want to spend time in the doctor's office, but they kept harassing me and calling. And one time I finally answered the phone and just said, listen, I appreciate you guys calling, but I'm not interested in coming in. I mean, they said, well, we need to review this. It's very important. I'm like, very important? You mean more important than death? You want me to do paperwork when this is happening to me? And they said, listen, it's important. We'll even send a car for you if that's what is needed. I'm like, you sent a car for me. I felt very important all of a sudden. Nobody cares unless you're pretty or dying, right? So pretty's never going to happen with me, so it was dying. So I'm like, well, that's okay, I'll drive myself. And so I drove in just to give them kind of the courtesy of it. The doctor came in, and he had the nurse with him, and their expression was different this time. It wasn't so much concerned as it was like concerned. And the doctor says, John, and he goes, there's no easy way of saying this. And I'm like, I've heard this before. And he said, we've made a terrible mistake. So when I was in the observation room, there was a guy in the observation room next door to me. They switched the charts on me. His name was John. My name is John Stephen. They just saw John, and they weren't any more careful than that. So the doctor came in and told me that I was dying. I wasn't dying. The guy in the room next door to me, he was the one with the tumor. Turns out I was just dehydrated and needed to get more sleep. That guy was dying, and I lived with that for 2 weeks. And so the doctor's very concerned. He says, I imagine you must be very angry right now. And I'm like, why would I be angry? Well, this is the best news I've ever gotten in my whole life. I'm going to live. I mean, unless I walk out and get hit by a car, but I feel bad for John next door. That guy's been sleeping and drinking water for the past 2 weeks. He's been sleeping his life away and drinking, and I guess they had already gotten a hold of him, and they told him, and I think about that story now where it's like, people will be like, oh my God, did you sue? Like, why would I have sued? Because they made a mistake. People make mistakes all the time. You don't run around suing everybody who makes a mistake. I know there are people who do. But when you do that, you're making the world really just a worse place. This is a guy who's kind of committed his life to healing people, and because he got charts backwards, somehow that should cost him a whole bunch of money. And I know there are people who say, yeah, you're not, I don't know, man. I feel like at that point you're committing yourself to making the world a worse place, not a better place, because the world wouldn't be made any better by that. It would be made better because you'd have more money, yeah, and he'd have less. You know, I'm not making the world a better place by that. I'm just making it worse for him and better for me, which isn't a better world. It's just a differently balanced world. So, I haven't changed. I've kept all those same mindsets because when I was there, again, I was convinced I figured out finally a decent way to live. And then if that's true, when you've got 6 months to live, shouldn't it also be true if you've got 6 years or 60 years or 600 years? If it's the proper way to go about things, it's the proper way to go about things. So this is all a very long way of saying, did that diagnosis of having 6 months to live, was this a good thing or a bad thing? Either, yeah, good thing or bad thing, I don't know. I know that at the end of all of it, you can make it good by saying, wow, this gave me a clarity that I never would have had otherwise. And I never would have had that clarity otherwise. And by the way, some of you will understand why I am the way that I am and why I behave the way that I behave and because I understand something that you cannot understand any other way, which is that life isn't just short. People say that. Life is short, true. But life is also unexpectedly short. You could think you have a lot of time, and all of a sudden you're walking down the street, you get hit by a car, and that's your last thought, like, really? Like this? Have you guys ever almost died in some way, and you were like this? You know, like you tripped and you fell into a pool and you can't swim, and you're like, really? Like this?
Oh, that's hard to swim.
Is it? How many of you learned how to swim like that? Like
when
you
I
fell in
was
the water
30, my dad threw me into the pool, and he's like, well, you'll survive.
And you went inside to go finish that.
Yeah.
Watching the game.
And I was just in the pool.
You've been plotting your revenge ever since. wait till he's old and he's kind of like. Oh,
he can't swim already. And he works on a boat.
Oh, I admire that. that's guts right there. He can't swim and he works on a boat. I wonder then, is that why he did it? Because he wanted you to learn since he couldn't.
Never asked him. He just I asked him once. He's like, I don't know. I was bored. And I was like, okay. Thanks.
The television was on the game was on a commercial break. Curiosity. How many of you did learn how to swim like that? Like you fell in or you got pushed in? Just a few of us. Like how many of you learned like the proper way, where like you went to a class, like a 6-week class, they put floaties on you and.
There's classes for that?
Yeah. That's how I found out. That's how I found out because I knew people who took their kids to do that. And I'm like, there's classes? I'm like, here's your class.
Yeah.
They're like, no, apparently yeah. And one of them was it was a 6-week class on how to swim.
$600
I don't know how much it was, but I just thought about that. I'm like, huh, old school. You just got fell in. Yeah, that's how I learned. I fell in, and I fell in, and my it wasn't even my friend. It was my friend's friend. He had a babysitter. The dude was like, he was in high school. I just remember he was in high school, and he thought I was just joking. And I was pretending I couldn't swim. He's like, he can swim, and so he didn't save me because he thought I was joking about it. And then I figured it out, fortunately. But a few years ago, I was in the ocean, and there was a riptide. You know what riptides are? So the water goes underneath, and it pulls you out. Now, I read that you're not supposed to swim against a riptide. You're supposed to go diagonally. Because if you swim against it, obviously the water's pushing you out, and then you can swim as hard as you want, and then whatever, you tire yourself out. So I remember reading about that, and I thought, no, I can outswim a riptide. Some of the biggest mistakes of my life have been that way. Oh, I'm sure I can land a plane. I'm sure I can swim against a riptide. I have no reason for believing I can do something, but when I lack an ability, I make up for it in extreme confidence. I've got this. I can fly a plane. I can whatever. And so I can skydive. Just give me the backpack. The parachute. I got this. And so I started swimming against the riptides. I'm like, I can do this. And I'm swimming really hard. And then I kind of look up, and I'm further away from the shore than when I started. And I'm like, well, I just got to swim harder. And then at one point I was finally exhausted, and I look up, and I was even further from the shore. And I remember thinking, this is like 5-6 years ago. I remember thinking, like this? Well, this is going to be stupid. I remember literally thinking, my students are going to talk so much shit about me. They'll be at my funeral, they're going to be laughing at it, And so then at that point, I finally started to swim diagonally, and I was just thinking, like, well, I hope obviously I made it. Otherwise, this would be a really weird conversation, right? So obviously I made it, but, I don't know. I guess I learned something I could learn no other way. And that's the point, is that sometimes either in life we experience tragedies that seem harsh to us. They seem bad to us. But you're learning something that you could not learn any other way. And so it could be instead taken for a good thing. Now, something like that happens to you, that's, again, that seems like a pretty easy way. You have to just choose. But like the death of a loved one, of course, your kitten gets hit by a car, whatever. Whenever a tragedy befalls you in life, sometimes it's much harder. Sorry, a tragedy that befalls a loved one, that's a harder one for us to gain something out of. But, and it's easy for us to sit back and say, well, it's your choice. You can either be made stronger or weaker by this. But unfortunately, it's true. It's our choice. We can be either made stronger or weaker by this. And so, going back and finishing up what I was saying, some of you then will understand why I'm the way that I am. I'm going to say the truth. Why? Because what's the worst that can happen to you in life? What's the worst that can happen to you?
Drop your tacos.
Drop your tacos. Oh, I didn't even think about that. Yeah. Besides that, don't say drop your pizza. Good law. What's the worst that can happen to you? Die. Was this?
What? That too, I guess. You lose your house.
Lose your house? No, not even there. I've done that before. I've been homeless before. Turns out you can work it out. Yeah.
Is it fun?
I've been homeless twice. One time I was homeless by, I guess both by choice, but no, it wasn't fun. The second time I was homeless, actually, I bought a business. I put all my money into it. And so I didn't have a place to live, so I just lived at the business. And then I slept on a concrete floor for like 6 months, and then I finally got an air mattress, and that was the shit, dude. After sleeping on a concrete floor, all of a sudden I'm like styling my air mattress in the back of my shop. And then one day, all of a sudden I realized, I'm making money, I can afford an apartment. So I was homeless for a while, but I mean, I guess I was houseful. I had a place to go. I was living on, only one time I was on the street for just a short while. But you can, you learn that you can kind of come back from those things. And one thing I learned from being on the street is this: I don't want to live on the street.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it's true. It's like one of those reasons. Like if any of you guys have a job, if any of you guys have a make job, make job. Yes, you work at McDonald's. Anybody working fast food? You should. Yeah, you should get a fast food job. Because that might teach you, I don't think I want to work in fast food the rest of my life. Or maybe it'll teach you, I can do this, but better. And maybe that sends you off in the direction of a restaurant. So, I don't know. But now you start to realize the worst thing that's going to happen to you is that you're going to die. And that's going to happen to all of us anyway. So now what are you afraid of? Because you all wake up every day and you somehow manage to live, knowing that you're going to die at some point. And you manage to love people, even though you happen to know that there's no good end to love. The person you love is either going to die or go away, or you're going to die or go away. If you find a spouse and you're going to love them for the rest of your life, of course, until one of you dies, unless you die at the same time, there's no good end to it. But yet, we still manage to wake up every day and face that and do it anyway. And if you start to realize that's the case, now I guess the question becomes, what are you really afraid of then? Are you afraid that if you speak the truth, people are going to call you names? Ooh. People are going to go online and talk very badly about you on Twitter, like Twitter's the real world or something like that. Maybe all of a sudden that other stuff is just not going to matter to you anymore. You speak the truth, I guess maybe something that's worse than death is living a life that's not real, not having the courage to be who you are, not having the courage to tell the truth, because you're afraid you're going to get called names online, or people are going to, like, if I say something in here and then all of a sudden I come in tomorrow and I get a bunch of students outside my classroom protesting, whatever. I need some theme song. There we go. I need some theme music. Whatever. I'm going to die. It's not, no matter how many protesters are outside your house, it's not as bad as dying. But maybe if you have to live with yourself knowing that you don't have the courage to live authentically and really, then maybe that's the real problem. So whatever it is that happens to you, it only seems harsh, maybe. But it's not what it appears to be. Any more than this is who you really are, who you appear to be, the illusion. So, questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticism?